Indeed, a pleasure to introduce and welcome our UFC insider. Some of you may know him from the wildly popular morning show on CJAY92. JD joins us. How are you, brother?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. This has been a long time coming.
Too long.
Yes.
Excited to see the new digs. This looks awesome.
This is not bad, right?
Yeah, brother. Absolutely.
It's got that vibe. It's got that feeling, right?
But I tell you, there's an air of trepidation when I get called an expert or an insider in anything. I would not call myself that in the realm of
You don't think so?
Anything except for Ultimate Fighting. I'd go, I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
I would border upon expert on a topic like this.
You would, eh?
I think so.
Okay.
Probably.
We should make mention that this has been rather big week for you. I don't want you to, put them, side by side or have to pick one. But in addition to doing this program, you also interviewed somebody from Metallica this week, right?
Rob Trujillo. Yeah, the bass player, which was insane.
Yeah.
Terrifying, exciting, so unbelievably cool. And it still baffles me how dudes that are solar systems more popular than the average guy like you and I can still find a way to just look a fellow man in the eye and have just a really normal conversation. It was really cool.
Now, they are on their way out, or they are out touring at this point?
Metallica, yeah, about to tour the entire world for like 2 full years.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, pretty well, man. And they spaced it out pretty nicely. A lot of cities, they're going to do like a Friday and a Sunday and take the Saturday night off and do 2 totally different sets of openers, 2 completely different set lists.
Really?
Yeah, and they'll just hit continent after continent and just make sure the whole world gets to see Metallica.
Wow. I'm assuming up in Edmonton.
Yeah, we'll get 2 shows at Commonwealth next summer. Like 2024. That's how far out that band is booking now. Is like a full year and a bit in advance.
I can't imagine that.
Very few bands that could do it. Very few bands you could look at and go, here's your next 2 years of dates. Yeah. You're playing all of the major continents, all the major countries, all the major cities, football stadiums when you get there. That band is enormous.
It is funny to me that I think it was 1994, my dad and I sat in Commonwealth Stadium for Voodoo Lounge with the Rolling Stones. And we both agreed that, well, this is the last time you'll ever see this. There's no bands that can do this. There's nothing coming up that will ever be able to do this. Here we are almost 30 years later. We have the bands.
Kind of wild, isn't it?
Music just keeps going, right?
I'm okay with it. As long as these bands want to hang out, as long as they can do it at a high level, the Motley Crues, the Guns N' Roses, the Metallicas, the Stones, the U2s of the world, as long as they're willing to do it at a high level, there's a bunch of us that either will see them again or haven't had the chance to that want to.
Can Motley Crue still do it at a high level?
God, no. Okay. So much so Mick Mars saw himself out. So
yeah. And yet the Stones will still perform at 80? Yeah. Like that's where, isn't Mick bouncing up against 80?
Mick would be right up around 80 and can still do it. Vince Neil sounds like a coyote in a garbage compactor.
Oh, I know. There's some hard miles on there. Noted author, JD Lewis.
Yeah.
This is also very special because I have not had the opportunity to publicly talk to you about this successful book. There it is. Cody the Roadie. You released this in the fall. We're working backwards on this. How successful was it?
We're creeping on 20 grand for the CJ Kids Fund.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, thank you, dude. Thank you.
That is amazing.
It's been so cool. I mean, that's gravy on top, if I'm being honest.
Sure.
The success of this whole thing was going to hinge upon just like making a thing, putting it out there, and getting to share it with people.
Right.
I wanted that to be the bar for success. Anything past that was great. And like I said, gravy. So like it's been cool to just put it out and share something that I made, something that is very far out of my comfort zone and what I typically do. Had never written a book before, had never written a book for kids. So not only getting to put it out, but then like take it to classrooms around the city, share it with kids and raise money for kids. That's been so cool.
I want to ask you about that part, because that's the part that intrigues me the most, is the going out and the reading to kids. And to me, our industry is changed. But this is a throwback to me about how people in radio used to be part of the community, and we kind of have lost that. Now it's, no disrespect, it's Olympians that go to schools, or it's firefighters, but it was nice to see somebody from the media going back. And what was the response like? What was it like, sitting in front of kids and reading your book?
So cool. I mean, I was raised in and around the library.
Yeah.
We were kids that we always had library cards growing up. We never had video game consoles, but whatever book you wanted in the next series you were reading was always ready and available from mom and dad. So, like literacy and reading was already super important to me, but then, getting to take it out to schools and share it with kids. You realize a lot of schools haven't had guests post-pandemic.
No.
Like there just hasn't, and it's not for a lack of interest or a lack of trying. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So for a lot of these kids, it's just the excitement of having somebody different in to just hang out with a face, you know. But the teachers love it because they get, 15 or 20 minutes to just put their feet up and catch their breath. And it's been, not only cool to read the book, but be able to gift it to a lot of classrooms and leave a bunch of copies there on behalf of local businesses like Spolumbos and Trolley 5, who have donated, larger amounts of copies like that.
Yeah.
And then get to run a Q&A with the kids too, which ranges anywhere from what's it like writing a book and questions about that whole process to what kind of vegetables does Cody the Roadie eat?
Were you prepared? Awesome. Were you prepared for those questions?
Eventually I got there. Yeah. That wasn't the kind of question I was ready for, but yeah.
Okay, so take me all the way back to the beginning. Where did the journey start?
Probably 2, maybe 3 years ago when I first started tapping on the script. It was very early in COVID, actually, like first lockdown. It had been something I'd always wondered about doing.
Okay.
What would it be like to write a kid's book? Why hasn't anybody written a rock and roll themed kids book? There just didn't seem to be any of that out there when I went to read to my nephews. And I thought, well, geez, why don't I just try that? How hard could it be? The answer is harder than I thought, candidly, but I worked on that script for over a year, just tapping on it in coffee shops, in my apartment, wherever it might have been. Finally got it to a space where I liked it enough that I wanted to see if anybody else thought it was cool. Seemed to pass the litmus test, and then I went about finding an illustrator because I couldn't draw.
Yeah.
So I called my buddy Shane Connery-Volk, who sings for a local rock band called One Bad Son. And he, when the pandemic happened, shows were off. He needed something to do, and he had started illustrating comic books. So he seemed like the perfect dude.
Yeah.
A guy from the world of rock and a guy who could draw a mean picture. I gave him no artistic direction whatsoever. Just said, here's my words, draw whatever comes to mind. And he came back about 3 months later with a full book ready to go, and we got to work.
What's the key to writing a children's book as opposed to if you tried to write this as a novel or a short story?
The kids sure seem to enjoy all the rhyming and the cadence to it. So I think it was making sure that flow was there, which was a completely different writing style, something I was truly not used to. So that was fun to learn. And I think just making sure that it had some kind of like an element of humor to it for sure, like a funny ending that the kids could kind of laugh around, and also maybe a little bit of a lesson that they could take away, and hopefully just take them inside of a world that they might not know. It seems like a lot of people don't know what happens before or after a rock show.
Yeah.
The roadies never get to shine.
Never shine.
Right? Like never, ever. So it was cool to be able to.
Jackson Brown tried.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So like neat to be able to hopefully, give the shine to a group of people who don't normally have it, and make some kids laugh along the way.
So were you have you always written? Were you always a guy that would write things? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. In various capacities for sure. Never anything like this, but I've always loved to write.
Yeah. 100%. Okay. Yeah. So the book, how hard was it to sell? I mean, in the sense of to a publisher, how hard was it to get it made?
So we looked at a publisher, but I like I said, I wanted to raise all this money for the kids fund. That was the number one goal. I didn't want to make a penny.
Yeah.
The only reward I wanted was internal, candidly. So when I started going to publishers or talking to a lot of the major bookstores, they want a piece of the pie. Even when you tell them that you're not getting any of the pie, they go, well, we still want some.
Yeah.
So I independently published. Went to Little Rock Printing in Ramsey. They cut me an unbelievable deal once they heard that it was for kids.
Yep.
And then we just started doing pop-up shops. So whether that was, on the concourse to the Rough House, selling them there, going to Spolumbos down in Inglewood and popping up for a couple of hours, or just taking them to concerts we were at or wherever it might have been, and just started to distribute that way.
So you're telling me that you've sold enough for $20,000 into the kids fund, the CJAY92 Kids Fund, without ever really being in the mainstream book market.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you. I had to get creative, and I had to be willing to do a lot of the stuff myself and try things, like I said, I wasn't comfortable with or knew nothing about.
Yeah.
Basically turned my apartment into the Cody the Roadie distribution center for 2 or 3 months. Did all the, because I've been selling it online too. I should mention that.
Yeah.
And all those mail outs were done out of the house.
What's the website?
CodyTheRoadie.ca.
Okay.
Yeah. Still do have, I think I got about half a box of books left. So if I can move those, we've officially sold out everything.
And that's it?
Probably. Yeah. I think so. We'll see. If there's an appetite for sure. I've thought about a sequel too, potentially.
Have you?
Honestly, I enjoyed the process enough, and I've enjoyed sharing it even more so.
Well, you're a little bit of a rarity because in the old gig, September, October, November was book everything was coming out for Christmas. So we always got the authors through. You always got, everybody wrote a book, and it was the same thing. Oh, you don't know how hard it is to write a book. You don't know how hard it is to get it published. So much work. It's not worth the money and all those sort of things. And I appreciate that. Like, I get it. It's Canada. It's not the United States. We don't have that mark, especially hockey books and things like that. So to hear an author, actually the only other guy that talk like you is coming in after you, which is Eric Dachek when he wrote King of Russia with Dave King over in Russia,
which I just read, by the way.
Oh, did you just read
about
it?
6 months ago? I read that on vacation in Mexico. That is a tremendous,
incredible book. Yeah. Like, it supersedes the KHL, but it's still appropriate reading. Yeah. And I loved it because, well, I knew both guys, but it also really, Eric did such an amazing job of telling it through Dave's eyes. Having said that, you guys are the only two that I've ever heard that said, yeah, I enjoyed the process, which I think is kind of neat.
I think I just loved how different it was. How it was nothing like my regular job. It was nothing like preparing a radio show. It was so new. It was such a different part of my brain to exercise. I think that's where I derived so much enjoyment, so much challenge. It was a lot of fun.
Anybody, like, it seems to me we live in a world now that this would be easy to take, not easy. There would be an appetite to take it and make something visual out of it in a moving format, movie, video, or anything like that. Any talk about that?
I would like to animate it. Yeah. Even just turn it into a short that classrooms could share. The classrooms we haven't been able to get to for a reading, whether they're too far away or we just haven't had the time. I'd love to provide that as a resource and hopefully make it an animated short at some point. Hopefully, assuming Gene Simmons doesn't steal it. I should mention that. I wound up getting a copy into the demon's hands.
I saw that
pre-Christmas. And what he told me as soon as he put his mitts on it was, wow, this is really good. Do you have a lawyer? And I go, I don't have a lawyer, but I bet you got a better one than I do. So if you're planning on stealing this, it's already yours, Gene. It's already yours.
I love it. I wonder about, Cody the Roadie land at some point. Like, if you could really blow this thing up and, books and that and video games, and then you get to the Cody the Roadie land.
Eventually we would just rebrand Callaway Park. And
that would be the natural, wouldn't it?
Callaway Park, if you're watching or listening, like, I'm open to that conversation. We can have that.
You would be happy to have
Absolutely.
that.
I'm readily available and no capital available.
What's the most interesting feedback you got on this, either from the person that gave it to you or the actual feedback, besides what is his favorite vegetables?
You know what? I at a high school, or a junior high school, I should say, in Okotoks, a couple of weeks ago. And as a part of that, got to give a talk not only on what it's like to be a broadcaster, what it's like to write a book, but also like mental health. And I tied the whole thing together with gratitude, because I'm so grateful for the whole thing. Yep. I really am.
Yep.
And this will sound real corny, but I had a kid slip me a note after the talk, and after having shared the book with them, that just said on the sheet of paper, thank you for your talk today. I didn't believe in gratitude before.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's it right there. Like, that's what I'm most proud of. That's what I'm most willing and excited to hang my hat upon. Is stuff like that. Is, just being able to share a message with kids that, like, hey, you should try something like this. You should bet on yourself a little bit. You should do the things that scare you, things you're unfamiliar with, and find copious amounts of self-love and gratitude through that.
What a great message about things that scare you. Because I talk about this often from youth sports and failure, that somehow we have demonized failure, yet failure remains, to me, the biggest teaching piece we have. It's taught me I am here because of failure. I have failed very well over my life, and I have learned from it. And that whole idea of trying things that intimidate you or that make you nervous, what a great message that is.
I feel like we can insulate ourselves way too often.
Yes.
Right. And then create this,
echo chamber almost.
Yeah. Well, and you create paralysis by analysis when you live in that fear. Right. There's no getting out of that. That's a self-created cage. And once you start overthinking it, stop betting on yourself, stop trying things, and stop challenging yourself. Like, there's no path out of that, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway, not just from the book writing process, but from the last couple of years of my life, is really just to challenge myself more and hopefully live a life a little less built on fear.
CodyTheRoadie.ca.
Yeah.
There are still a few left.
Got a couple.
Okay.
Got a couple.
Okay. So if somebody sees this today or shares this today, you can still get them. News that is not official. I don't believe this is written in stone, but it's still worth talking about. Ariel Halawane reporting last week that Calgary in line to get UFC 289 on June 10th.
It's the hot rumor.
It's a rumor.
Mm-hmm.
Are you comfortable with it?
I mean, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's sure a ton of smoke now. It would be strange if there wasn't a fire to go along with it. Like,
Right.
it's really is starting to look that way. There's a whole bunch of rumored bouts. I think about 8 of them now floating in total.
For that card.
Yeah,
Okay.
4 of which involve Canadians. So that would tell me, like, Western Canadian event, which has been a terribly kept secret, but that it sure looks like it's happening here, June 10th, and it's kind of nuts to think that was. Well, by the time we get there, that will have been 140 UFCs ago since we had the last one here, as far as pay-per-views go anyway.
And were you at that event?
149, yeah.
I was too.
Were you? That'll go down. I don't know how many events you've been to, but that's not just.
That's it.
That's your only event.
That's my only UFC
boy.
event.
Yeah, Well, so the bar is set very, very low for your next
but
one.
It wasn't for me. It was a fascinating, because it's not me. It's not my sport.
Okay.
Pat Steinberg was kind enough at the radio station to take me with him, and he was, very much into it, and he was the guy that knew everybody. It was just fascinating because it was unlike anything else that I'd ever been to. It was just a different feel. It was 19,289 people, or how many it was in that building at that night. Aren't typically at Flames games or Hitman games. They were just a different audience. That made it exciting to me. Being as close as we were, because we were sitting right ringside on the media side, just to see things. And I apologize because my mind is a little foggy, but I think we had a knockout at the time. It was the fastest ever knockout in UFC, like 7 seconds in, and it happened right in front of me. The co-main event, if I remember correctly, it reminds me a little bit, to get off topic into wrestling, of Orange Cassidy and that little thing that he does where he kicks the guy in the shins. That co-main event was they just went to work on each other's shins, and it was right in front of me. I can see why somebody a couple rows back or whatever would go, this is boring, but it was right in front of me. And I know it wasn't a very good. I know how many changes went into that. I know all of that. And I remember Tom Wright, who was the Canadian UFC representative. And I knew Tom from the CFL, so we had a chat afterwards, and he was apologizing to me. So they knew, and then Dana came out and he apologized right there, which was refreshing. You don't normally get that. I thought it was a great experience to go to, but I completely get where people, here we are, 11 years later, still connecting this possible event to that event, right? As a make good.
It'll be interesting to see how much of a make good they treat it as, I guess, because they have been back technically, right? They brought a fight night.
That's
here,
right, they did,
just before the pandemic.
Which was TV, right?
It was, and it was a really high caliber one. You had Dustin Poirier in the main event. It was a big star. Jose Aldo was in the co-main, I believe it was, against Jeremy Stevens. They brought a very high caliber fight night. Those made for TV events are quite often one great fight and 13 fights. This was not that. That was a great event, and that felt like the make good. Candidly, if we hadn't gotten this pay-per-view, assuming we do get 289, I would have been okay with that, to be honest, because I thought they brought a good enough fight night. We didn't need a pay-per-view necessarily. It felt like they'd kind of righted that wrong for those of us.
Because it's not me making this up. This is one of the quotes I was taking, from the reporting around it, that it's a make good. Is that a kind of a non-fight perspective on this? Is that we remembered the pay-per-view and we know it didn't go well, so this needs to be the make good. Does the fight fan feel that way?
I think it's just hinging upon what kind of a pay-per-view we get. The way they've been dressing up pay-per-views lately, they're not playing around. You're getting real bang for your buck, at least on the pay-per-view front. Right. So if they bring one of those here, it'll dwarf what we had with that fight night that came here, and that'll be even more of a make good in my mind anyway. They've made it good. This is just gravy on top of it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of reestablishing back in the market, because this would be the first Canadian post-COVID pay-per-view, correct?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. It'll also be interesting to see not only who's available to fight on that card, but what ticket prices end up looking like, especially up here. Because like you alluded to, first Canadian event post-pandemic, demand will be high, and they're charging crazier ticket prices than they ever have before in every other city, every other country. So I wonder what that looks like here too.
Yeah. The other craziness in all of this, and not related, and I understand, but from a venue point of view, this dilapidated, needs to be replaced dump. And I say that with so much love, because I do love the building. In the span of 2.5 months, we'll play host to a UFC pay-per-view, possibly an AEW house show, which we've never seen here before, and then a WWE SmackDown event in August. It's crazy how it's kind of feast or famine right now.
I'm really surprised by that too. I'll be honest. You know, when they named the 3 potential cities, you know, maybe it was Edmonton, maybe it was Vancouver, maybe it was Calgary. I thought surely we're at the bottom of the power rankings.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, venue not honestly being the only reason. I thought maybe they'll come to Alberta because maybe it'll be easier to make an event happen here than in British Columbia. Sure, that makes sense. But surely they'll pick the sexier, shinier building 3 hours up the highway.
Right.
But somehow we get the phone call. I don't totally understand it.
I think it's CSEC being aggressive in the marketplace. I think it's CSEC. I mean, you just look at all of the. I think at one point, and I don't know this to be true, even though I worked there for 4 years. I don't know this to be exactly true, but I think for a long time you're there, and if they want to come through, they call you. But I wonder if CSEC's now playing a more active role of going out and trying to attract. Because of COVID and trying to regroup all of that. But I think it doesn't hurt that whole conversation about an arena, right? Or an entertainment complex. If you have these things and you go, we are attracting right now with the Wranglers here. They become the second busiest building in Canada, I believe, just on venue, on day nights, right?
I do kind of wonder too if some of our local flavor, as far as like the UFC roster goes, has helped that case a little bit too.
Well, tell me about that, because that I wouldn't be educated on.
So, like I said, there's 8 rumored fights right now, 4 involving Canadians, and that's not even including 2 of the local dudes, Minakeem Dawodu and Chad the Monster Angeliger. Both of whom have trained out of Assassin's Creed here in town. Both have UFC fights on their record. We saw Chad fight on the Nate Diaz card against Tony Ferguson last September. Neither gentleman has fought since then. They were both on that card. So that has to factor into the decision-making process too. Yeah, I mean, they're due to fight. It would make a world of sense to have them here. And a couple of guys hailing from Calgary is just another reason to do it here.
Where do they fit in everything, though? Are they up-and-comers? Are they considered challengers? Because I don't think Dana White does things just for the sake of being cuddly and feeling friendly.
Sure. So Angeliger is an alumni of Dana White's Contender Series.
Okay.
So would be on the rise. Lost his last fight, but was on, I think, like a 10 or 11 fight heater before that. So an up-and-comer for sure, and a guy with a ton of momentum. Hakeem's been on the scene for a minute too. Fought in World Series of Fighting, and then was an acquisition for the UFC from there. This would be his, assuming he fights at 289. Probably his 6th or 7th UFC fight. So, a guy that Canadian fans are familiar with, 2 of the biggest, if not the biggest Canadian names right now.
Okay.
Well, candidly, we don't have big Canadian MMA names right now. You don't have that George St. Pierre obviously anymore. Rory McDonald's gone. Guys like that.
Yeah.
Mark Hominick, no longer a thing. So it's not like it used to be where they'd roll through Toronto and you knew the 2, 3, 4 Canadians that would be on the card. It's a bit of a different animal now.
So where would these guys, if you were booking this, where would you be slotting these guys in on the card?
I mean, both action guys with heavy hands. So either guy could make for a great curtain jerk fight, like have them open the main card or have them headline your prelims, something like that. They're not opening the entire show, I don't think. I think it's somewhere middle of the pack or on that pay-per-view card. I think local flavor makes a ton of sense there.
What are, beyond them, I saw a couple of matches and it doesn't mean much to me. It would mean more to you. What are the rumored matches and where do they fit?
I mean, I think the only one with any name recognition to it, candidly, would be Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, veteran of the sport, guy who's trained with Conor McGregor recently, karate stance. He's supposed to fight Michel Pereira, who's a guy who's you'd recognize his backflips in the cage and some circus antics. They're supposed to be on the card, and I'd imagine that's probably inside your 5 main pay-per-view fights, somewhere in there. But that's a middle of the pack fight. I still don't know who headlines this thing. That to me is, as a diehard, is pretty confusing. Looking at it and looking at the roster, who's booked, who isn't, and keeping in mind their biggest tentpole event of the year is 1 month after this supposed event. I just don't know who's available, because you're saving a lot of your stars for July in Vegas.
Yep.
What stars do you want to spend on Canada, knowing that you can't command a pay-per-view price or an exorbitant ticket price without some big names attached to it? So who are those names?
Okay. Female fighters, or do we expect to see a number of female bouts on this one?
Yeah, I think so. There's already 2 women's bouts already rumored on that card. And I think you probably see a women's strap here. If Amanda Nunes wasn't here with the bantamweight title fight, I'd be surprised. That's one that probably makes some sense.
You wouldn't hold that till Vegas?
I mean, you definitely could. I think that's one that probably makes some sense here. She's fought in Edmonton before, so the's like a bit of provincial familiarity there. So I think she would make some sense, and she brings a lot of credence and whatnot. So yeah, she makes sense. I also think men's flyweight is another championship fight you could probably see here. Not booked, guy named Brandon Moreno holds the strap right now.
Okay.
Really exciting young fighter. Probably makes some sense for a Calgary too, but you probably still need more than that. And I don't know who that is. Dustin Poirier is available, so maybe he gets the phone call. I don't know what that'll look like.
This is why you are the insider. I am the guy from the outside that watches, and the one that I had to chase down and go see was when Ronda Rousey, or when Nate Diaz fought Conor McGregor, right?
Yes.
And then Ronda Rousey was on that card. It was a spectacular card, and that's the one that motivated me to go find a bar that I could watch it at, right? So that got me out of the seat. What I'm finding right now is I don't feel like the UFC has that draw right now. Now, ebb and flow is probably the right way to put it. Where do you see the product in the history of UFC? Where are we at right now?
It's apparently, statistically, by the numbers, like white hot down in the States.
Okay.
So I think we have a bit of a different camera angle on it. Again, back to just not only not having Canadian fighters, but not having events up here. I think that hurts our camera angle on it a little bit.
Yep.
I think they've built this business model with pay-per-views and ESPN Plus down in the States and guaranteed fight nights just about every weekend now. As saturated as the product is, they almost don't need the superstars. They don't cultivate them the same way.
Yep.
There's not the incentive. They just got to make sure there's fights on every Saturday night. At the same time, like, you still need big names for pay-per-views, like the one we're talking about. You still need big names for that. So, I don't think when they sold initially, right, when they sold for that $4 billion, I think when Endeavor bought them, that was about as hot as the product has ever been, right?
Yep.
You were at Conor McGregor at his absolute apex. Ronda Rousey had just been head kicked, the whole 9 yards. I don't know that it's as hot as it was then. I don't know you have those must-see attractions, but I think there's more on the come up, and I think a lot of those familiar faces. John Jones just showed it about a month ago.
Right.
Still ready, willing, and able to not only step back in, but draw big numbers and put asses in seats.
Let's talk about the theater and the young fighters coming up. I think if you look at traditional sports, basketball in Canada is probably never been better in terms of its production of players. How much of that has to do with Steve Nash's back-to-back MVPs? Well, that's 15, almost 20 years ago. It takes a while for this stuff to happen. Dana White, UFC, investing in the weekly shows and the different camps and everything. Where are the fighters coming from now? What are there new countries? Are there new styles? Or where is the young up and comers? Where are they developing?
Yeah, this really has become a global sport. It's been cool to see. Like right now, you've got just using the country of Mexico as an example. You got 3 Mexican champions right now. You go back 3-4 years, there was not only no Mexican champions, there really wasn't anybody seemingly on the horizon. So there's a sport a country rather, that grabbed the sport and ran with it and got very good at it very quickly.
Right.
I think as much as these athletes are coming from all over the world, they're now building performance institutes in all these major continents too. They put one in China. They've got one down at the Apex in Vegas. I'd be surprised if there wasn't one in Canada at some point.
Yeah.
I just think it makes a world of sense if you're looking to cultivate new talent, give them all the tools, and make it readily available for them to swing past the UFC Performance Institute and use all the gear and the coaching for free. In theory. So I think that's where a lot of the talent is coming from, is all over the world, and more specifically this Dana White's Contender Series they run in the summer, which has become a great content farm for them, but also a great way to just develop talent, put 2 prospects in the cage and essentially tell the 2 of them, winners in the UFC, losers going home.
Yeah. I feel like the old man who has to quote or go back and reference the start of this product when I asked this question. But what's the discipline? What's the major discipline now? Or are we fighting that, instead of fighters being from a jiu-jitsu background, that they're really combination athletes, that they're really taking some from grappling, some from striking? Where is the discipline in the sport now?
It's funny because there's so few cases of a guy being, only able to be good at one practice or one discipline. It used to be that if you were unbelievably good at that one thing, you could skate by on that. And it just isn't that kind of sport anymore. But what fascinates me is you still have guys coming from all different walks of life as far as combat goes. You'll have, guys who are based in karate or sambo,
okay,
guys who are primarily jiu-jitsu athletes who have to learn striking along the way. College wrestlers still look at the UFC and go, that's still the retirement plan. Like, after I'm done on the college wrestling circuit, I'll take these skills, hone them, and take them there. I think wrestling still seems to be like the primary discipline, it would seem anyway, or where a lot of the kids are coming from, at least stateside. But it's still so fascinating to me that you can still have some guys who have no background save for brawling in the streets. Those dudes are still out there.
Yeah, they're out there too. What was your introduction? What was your on-ramp to the UFC?
The Ultimate Fighter, funnily enough, the reality show.
It was the reality show.
Which will make a comeback alongside Contender Series this summer, right? McGregor against Chandler as coaches, which is a great, brilliant revival of the brand and a washing of Conor's brand, to be honest with you, too. But that's a great way to recruit a brand new fan base. That's what got me in the door. It was the BJ Penn and Jens Pulver installation, which I think was the second or third incarnation of the Ultimate Fighter.
Right.
And they've gone on to have like 25, 30 seasons of that thing. It's technically
like Survivor.
Technically, it's never left TV,
Yeah, that's right.
You go, Survivor's still on, and so is the Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my foot in the door. I remember being in broadcasting school, buying the DVDs, thinking like, let's see what this Ultimate Fighting thing is all about, and the rest is absolutely history.
And was that bad? They would end up fighting at a pay-per-view, right? The coaches
Penn and Pulver, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Be remiss if I didn't ask the Conor McGregor question. Where does he fit in all of this?
It's a great question. Yeah, and I don't know that anybody has the answer. I mean, there's a few different schools of thought. Some people would tell you that this game moves too quickly for a guy not to be training. You know, that's a dude who's spent a lot of time out of the octagon and a lot of time not training, just getting himself into gobs of trouble.
Yep.
And being a movie star, you know, and being a celebrity. And there's that old expression, you know, once you get used to sleeping in silk sheets, however that goes, you know, who would want to get out of them to fight? That's super fair too. So a guy who sits on the sideline that long and then tries to make a comeback can look pretty slow and out of pace in very short order. There's other people that would tell you this is exactly the kind of adversity that a dude like Conor McGregor thrives upon, loves being counted out, has never been better than when he's painted into a weird corner and everyone says, no way, and then knocks out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, just what version of Conor not only shows up on people's TVs this summer, but then more importantly, you know, what kind of Conor, assuming he headlines Madison Square Garden this fall, shows up in the octagon. That'll be interesting.
Do you, and maybe the people that you consume the sport with, do you need Conor in the sport, or do you tolerate Conor in the sport?
We tolerate him. Yeah. There was a time where I think we were very enamored with him as a collective. You know, he was the dude that helped break it through.
Right.
You know, through to even more people. I think at this point now, it's almost just it's not a good look, candidly. I think a lot of people associate that dude with our sport, and those who, you know, really respect the sport and the athletes that come with it, and know that it's not just cavemen in affliction shirts running about causing trouble in the streets. You know, don't really want a guy like that representing our brand. At the same time, like, you know, I'd be foolish to tell you that guy doesn't put rear ends in seats, you know, and isn't like a big part of the reason the UFC is now, in combination with the WWE, valued at over $20 billion.
Oh, we're getting to that. Do we still have that guys running around in affliction, human cockfighting conversation? We've moved past that.
Mercifully, by and large, I think we've seen ourselves out of that conversation.
Because I mean, that's where it started for me on the radar, and then, you know, we would do it on the radio in 2006, 2007. It's human cockfighting. You can't do that. But to me, I grew up. You knew, you know, in the 70s, you always knew the heavyweight champion. You always knew the heavyweight champion. You always knew the fastest runner, and you always knew the Kentucky Derby winner. Like, that was just it. And to me, it's I've never seen, and this is going to alienate a lot of boxers. And Steve Claggett has been so good to us, but man, boxing was such a big thing in my life, and now it just seems hard to find it, and it doesn't carry the same gravitas. Yet I look at, you know, this conversation about Conor McGregor reminds me of the conversation about Tiger Woods. Does golf need Tiger Woods? Does the UFC need Conor McGregor? Eventually, golf moves past Tiger Woods. Nice that he's playing. He's going to be in the... Oh, great. Conor's coming back. Cool. But I don't get the sense that you are, and when I say you, I mean the royal you, are all salivating, waiting for Conor to come back and save the sport. That's just not the case.
No, I think it's an even further extension of where things were at with that first Diaz fight. There were a lot of people that were tired of Conor McGregor when he fought Nate Diaz for the first time, and that's what helped put Diaz over was the fact that he was the guy to...
He was not a nice guy.
End the run. And you're right, wasn't a nice guy at the time, you know, and I think in some ways we're kind of back there in a weird way. I think there's a big chunk of the fan base that is turned on McGregor a little bit, and now is ready to see him out and is wondering if Michael Chandler will be that guy.
Right.
That's the brilliance of a McGregor, though, if we're being honest, right? Everybody's tuning in for one reason or the other, because, you know, you've been with Connor the entire ride, or because you're so ready for the ride to be over,
right,
that I got to pay my 60, $70 to, you know, to have my eyeballs on it when it happens.
I want to be careful about the next statement too. I'm so afraid of pissing off the fan base because it deserves respect. And I think there was a moment in time where I thought the UFC was going to invest heavily in the world of pro wrestling, and we're going to cut promos, and now we're going to do, you know, pull aparts, and now we're going to do, not to say that there aren't guys doing flips and, you know, celebrating fights and stuff, but I don't think that caught on. You know, the Brock Lesnar's and the Conor McGregor stuff. I mean, that was entertainment, and it was really from the wrestling standpoint. That didn't catch, did it? It's not. It didn't become a thing, right?
It didn't seem to. No, that attitude era kind of approach to things, right?
Right.
I think mixed martial arts fans want that to an extent, but not to the point where it feels cheesy in any regard. Like,
and it got cheesy for a bit.
Yeah, man. I think when you mentioned Brock Lesnar, the first instance that comes to mind is him coming into the cage to challenge Daniel Cormier a couple of years ago, and I think that was a point where we all went, I was okay with Brock Lesnar being cage side, like that's cool. But the minute he comes in and picks a pretend fight with DC, that's the minute it's a bit too wrestling for me and my ilk, I think.
Yeah. Let's talk about it. This past Monday became official. Endeavor and the WWE merge, a $21.8 billion merger. This has to be taken very seriously on a lot of levels. What does it mean to a UFC fan, this merger?
I'm interested to see what our sport can learn from theirs, candidly. You know, like I think it'll be interesting to see what the UFC can derive from the WWE business model, you know, and just what that looks like from a fan experience standpoint. I think that's something that Ultimate Fighting has tried to cultivate, which is almost like that. I don't know if cult is the right word, but that, you know, that cult-like fascination and following that pro wrestling is able to command. I think they've got that lightning in a bottle, and the UFC has it at times, but would like to find to have it more regularly. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I think there's a great way for those two brands to work together. Obviously, if I were a wrestling fan, I would wonder what that means for my roster. You know, because for the UFC roster, it's been interesting to watch with deeper pockets running the company about how it's really become about the bottom line, and that hasn't worked in the fighters' favor.
No,
but there's been no point of unionization or anything like that. The fighters haven't banded together, and I would wonder what that means for the wrestlers.
Those are two very similar conversations that have been had about Vince McMahon and Dana White, right? That the outspoken veteran will always go to, you know, how they're treated, the money, that, you know, all of that sort of thing. But, you know, the history of wrestling, they just could never organize, right? And I think you're going to see more guys get cut loose. I think they're going to be lean. I think they're going to rely on some of the built-in HR and travel things that, you know, they can combine. The biggest one to me is broadcast. I'm really curious to see if they become the hothouse for broadcast innovation, because there are some similarities. They can get cameras into rings or need to be by rings and things like that. I'm very curious to see what comes out of it in the next couple of years in terms of how we view these sports.
I also wonder, for a TV deal, what that looks like too, right? Because the UFC's got one more year with ESPN stateside. Right. WWE has 2 years left on their deal, but now you're able to take these two enormous properties and, in theory, take it to a Netflix and Amazon, whoever it might be that wants in on the live sports game, and go, man, you know.
Or do you try it again on your own?
That's interesting.
Or do you try it again on your own?
I mean, you'd have the assets, right? And
you got the WWE, you got the inventory, right? Which you do with the UFC too, but the inventory goes beyond just the one legacy. It's, you know, other wrestling promotions and things like that. And then, you know, you could become also a provider for others.
Because one thing you know for sure, if you're the UFC or the WWE, is both of these fan bases have shown like they're very willing to pay a subscription fee. They're willing to pay regularly for pay-per-views and events, and they want that content. If you will build them a library, they will come.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you take these two gigantic libraries, fuse them together, and then charge whatever you want? You're right. You may not even need a Netflix. You might not need any help with it.
I think you have to look at it whether or not you could develop that technology yourself, right? Almost like BAM, like when Major League Baseball invested in their own, technology, and I thought that was a brilliant move on their part, and it was, because they spun it off and sold it and all those sort of things. I can't help but think that wouldn't be one of the plays here, is at least to investigate that.
I'll be curious to see what it means from an advertising standpoint too. On the WWE side of things, you would watch more wrestling than I would. I don't know how prevalent, advertising is, like on the,
it is now.
Yeah,
it is now. And that's a technology thing, right? Because they've been able to put the LED boards around the ring and things like that. So you have, in the last couple of shows, started to see, Mountain Dew or Cheetos or whatever, or the movies or whatever, which, again, that was, I remember, like, that could have been the quickest argument I ever heard. My God, they're putting advertising on the mat, and what? And it's become a part of it, right?
Honestly, at this point, like the octagon canvas looks like you could just remove it and then drape it over top of a NASCAR.
That's exactly
it's got that many advertisements on it, and now
nobody pushes back.
No, nobody does. In fact, at this point, they've doubled down. I don't know if you saw it yesterday, but now for about $1,400, I think is what they're charging for it. You can, as a fan, have your name put on the octagon in microscopic print, and they'll charge you for it.
I'm sorry, for how much?
$1,400. And then not only do you get your name on the octagon, which you can't see on the broadcast, it'll be way too friggin' small for that. Then you get that tiny piece of the octagon in a frame mailed to you. And they'll do.
See, that's the brilliance of it. That is absolutely the brilliance of it.
Because
right?
That guy's out there. He's out there.
You don't think, and you don't do it for every wrestling show, but if you did that at WrestleMania or something like that, that would be huge in the collector world.
Sell the whole canvas millimeter by millimeter and print money while you're doing it.
Oh my God.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is brilliant. The other part that I wonder about is things like clothing deals. Because we remember the big argument, actually, I'm wearing a Reebok, right? And the whole Reebok debacle, if you want to call it that. But now you have these two entities that sell a lot of merch, and can produce a lot of merch. You wonder about the Fanatics deal, because I believe both are under Fanatics, are they not?
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, there's some real interesting synergy.
It really is. Yeah. Venom is the in-cage provider for the UFC now.
Yeah.
And that was a super lucrative deal for them, coming off of the Reebok deal. And yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder, where that can go and what kind of money that can make, not only for those manufacturers, but when they're charging $60-$70 a t-shirt at a live event now, like, everybody except us is making copious amounts of money.
Do you have any sense of what age group enters into fandom for UFC? I mean, is it a teenage sport? Because that's the one thing I do wonder a little bit about, is if you recently the WWE made a lot of noise about going to PG-14 or whatever that is, M14, whatever. They wanted a little bit, more racy content. I just wonder if you don't dumb it right back down into big giant characters like Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy, so that you can kind of own that 6-year-old market all the way up.
Yeah, I wonder if that's maybe almost the next step for them. I think right now their ideal target fan is a guy with a lot of disposable income, and I only base that upon what it costs to be a true diehard.
Right.
One that's paying for all the content. That he's streaming, the guy that's buying all of the t-shirts, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a guy with a lot of money to be spending on stuff like that. But then when I look at the fighters that do cut through right now, the guys that are on the cusp or on the come up, it's the guys that are great at streaming. It's the guys that are great on social media. And that to me would skew at least a little bit younger. Like the people that are consuming content like that and interacting with athletes that way would be leaning a little bit younger. So I think you're right. I think the bigger you can make the personalities, the younger, in theory, you could skew the entire product.
The last one, and it's almost the first thing that came out of the merger, was co-branded weekends. Do you see that working? Could you have a WrestleMania weekend tied into a big UFC weekend and just take over a town?
It's interesting because, these big sports events so often tiptoe around one another, right? The UFC won't even put an event on Super Bowl weekend anymore. It's just there's no sense in trying to compete with that. This past weekend, UFC didn't have an event because WrestleMania, right? And I wonder if you run the risk, especially when Mania now is a 2-night event, right? Like, where exactly is there room for more UFC viewing there? How much eyeball time can you really expect to get from the average person, even if they are your P1, your absolute diehard? I don't know. I really don't know. I also don't know if there's enough crossover there. Like,
absolutely.
I don't know if I want in on the wrestling game as bad as I want to watch mixed martial arts, and vice versa. Like, I don't know that the average wrestling fan is going, look, man, Mania is already 2 nights. You want me to give you a 3rd night
Yeah.
of my time and my money for Ultimate Fighting? Cool idea, but I'd rather watch it next week.
And I think that was one of the misnomers from some in the the non-sports related media is they said, oh, well, it's the same. It's not the same fans. It isn't. And that's part of the brilliance of it.
Yeah.
Is they brought 2 large fan bases into one group now.
And man, if that Venn diagram can exist at all, right? Any crossover that exists, copious amounts of money to be made from the guy who wants to watch both of your enormous products.
Yeah. Well, and who knows if and when UFC 289 on June 10th gets announced and made official, I wonder if we're going to see any kind of hint of that relationship at that event.
Well, that'll be the other thing, right? Is how do you cross promote? Like, I'm sure like there's no brainer ways of just plugging the next big WWE pay-per-view on a UFC pay-per-view. That's the easy stuff. It's, what wrestlers are you procuring to have cage side at a UFC event? What presence do you have there you mesh the fan expos together and start doing big get-togethers like that? I wonder.
Well, could it be the intros? Could it be something as simple as, do you set up your venue more like a WWE venue and allow, because it was really cool. 289, I can't remember. It was at least one wrestler that came out to Bret Hart's theme song, but they snake through the crowd.
Yeah.
As opposed to that giant stage where they come out and they have those incredible, I wonder if that's an adaptation that they might borrow.
Well, I mean, that's something the UFC's gotten away from. And I think it's something the fan base clamors for. We want more personality. Honestly, that's what sells. There's a precedent for it, early mixed martial arts and, in the early 2000s in Japan, that there was all kinds of pomp and circumstance, pyro, entrance songs, whatever it might be. Yeah. That's the part of pro wrestling. I think that is just the biggest no-brainer to take and plug into mixed martial arts,
even if it's just the big events.
Yeah, let these guys have signature songs that they walk out to, right? There's a bit of that, like 149 here in Calgary. I remember Uriah Faber came out to California Love by Tupac, and the whole place went off.
Yeah,
there ought to be more of that. There ought to be more, goofy moments where Israel Adesanya comes out dressed as the Undertaker.
Yep. That
shouldn't be a one-off. That should be the kind of stuff that's happening on every major pay-per-view.
As long as we're not going to see Uncle Howdy and Bray Wyatt on UFC shows. They can stay in wrestling. I love them, but I don't need the supernatural crap.
Do we want Brock Lesnar back in the UFC?
No. How old is he? Like
there's fun to be had. Yeah, but it's heavyweight MMA. You can fight until you're 80.
I guess. I don't know. Do you? You tell me.
It's interesting. I mean, that was one of the first conversations. What wrestlers would want to fight and what fighters would want to wrestle.
It's not always a good mix, though.
It isn't, right? To just assume that that's going to work.
No, Brock was different. Brock was, that wrestler that they groomed right out.
Yeah.
But, you look at CM Punk and what a big deal that was, and how poorly that ended.
The nice thing is now, if there's anybody on the WWE roster that has those CM Punk curiosities, now it's a whole lot easier to scratch them now.
Oh yeah,
same company.
Sure,
Come on over.
Come on over.
See how it goes.
Give it a shot.
Spoiler: it won't go well.
No, it won't. All right. Before I let you go, Rough House. How are things going over there?
So good.
Is it
so fun?
Yeah.
We had 17,500 people for St. Patty's Day, which was, just so much fun. Panther City in town this weekend. 2 regular,
which is a possible playoff matchup.
Potentially, yeah. Playoffs clinch now, and hoping for a home playoff date. And boy, the boys look good. For a season we weren't sure what the team was going to look like. They've been great. A lot of fun to watch.
No, the last 2 years you watched Dane Doby and Curtis Dixon walk away, and those were supposed to be killer blows. And Bordy's done a really good job, and Mouse has done a really good job. They just keep finding a way. Now, I would think they're a little more defensive structured than they were with those guys, but it's working. And the guy between the pipes, is there anybody better in the league right now?
Nobody better than Christian Del Bianco. Nobody.
Right?
Nobody.
No. And he's, speaking of personality, he's got a big personality too, right?
They're somebody ought to do more to capture some of those personalities. I don't know who that guy is.
My criticism is stop presenting the game like minor league hockey and start giving lacrosse its own perspective and broadcast.
There are incredible stories there, just like waiting to be told. Big personalities that are just waiting for a spotlight.
Absolutely, 100%. Speaking of big personalities and spotlight, CJAY92 presents Dungeon Wrestling tomorrow. You going to be there?
Actually, I'm up in Red Deer for Easter festivities, so I won't be there.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, I'll take care of the. Will Jesse be there?
Oh yeah. In fact, if you could do me a solid, because I won't be there to do it. If you could throw Jesse a clothesline, a tombstone
100%.
pile driver,
whatever you would need,
just a quick stunner, even on your way in or your way out.
Absolutely happy to. Really, you were there the last go round, and we just started the show, and I came away and I was just so blown away. It was so much fun. It felt like old time small town wrestling. It felt like the pavilion was loud and full, and they, I know Brett's got a hand in the booking, but they gave you a really good match off the get-go, which I thought just set that crowd on fire. And that is as much fun as I've had in an evening in a long time. They put on a great show.
That 6-man tag match was a roar too, right before the intermission. And you're right, that room is perfect. Not just because of the history, but honestly, just the way it's put together is just perfect for that kind of event. It's so cool to hear, Jesse was telling me he walked through with Brett shortly before the first event they had in there. And Brett was pointing at spots where he used to, hang out and watch as a kid, when he was about yay tall. So just like the rich history in the pavilion, there's no better spot in town for it.
I don't know if you can find a more diverse cross-section of fans at an event in the city.
Yeah,
because there was lots, to that point about, there was lots of people pointing out to grandsons or kids, that's where I used to watch, or that's, I sat there, and that sort of thing. And it's the most unpretentious, it's back in time. You could shoot a movie about the 50s in there, right? Without having to do a single thing to it. It was absolutely, and they put on a good show. Like, they really put on a good show.
I love how generational wrestling is. I wasn't raised a wrestling kid at all. I don't have that childhood affinity to it.
That was Jesse though, right?
It was big time. Yeah. So it's neat for me to see not only him, passing that along, that love of wrestling and live events, and also watching televised ones to his kids, but also to go to an event like that. And like you said, like, see all these different generations, all these different walks of life coming back, because at the end of the day, like, everybody loves live wrestling. Everybody.
Yeah, I know. It's fantastic. So get out and check that out. What else you got going on? It seems like a lot. A book. You're obviously in the UFC Insider. You've got the Rough House, and then you've got there's the rest. There's the show.
Yeah, the morning radio program too.
Keeps going. How do you guys avoid the trap that seems to gobble up the rest of radio? Because you guys are still what I would consider a traditional morning show, what I grew up with, kind of, lots of stuff going on, the right kind of, but also you own the town, like you prop the town. Everything else just feels like it's been too many fingers on it, right? Too many consultants, too many, we had a research study, and you got to say this more. You guys just feel like it's Jerry. It feels like Jerry's show is just continuing.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot, and he's the guy who deserves the biggest, tip of the cap in all of it. The trail that he blazed, in having all that fun for all of those years, and being so community focused.
Yeah.
And just driven by community. A lot of people ask me, what did you learn from Forbes? What did he teach you? He taught me a lot of stuff, good and bad habits, to be honest. But the biggest thing was always just to make sure people are feeling good and having fun, and to be helping people whenever and wherever possible. And I think we have very, very simple filters for this radio show. It's just making sure everybody has as much fun as we're having in the room every single morning, and making sure we're as involved in the community as possible. That's it. I don't know that we have a secret sauce outside of that. We're very good friends. Like, we have a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun working with Forbes, and I've had a lot of fun over my radio career, but I don't know that I've ever had as much fun as I'm having right now, honestly.
Which it comes across, right?
Thank you.
You can't fake that.
Thank you.
I'm not taking knocks at other people. It's just the business has changed so much that you remind me of what I say about certain broadcasters in hockey, that thank God they got in when they did, because they wouldn't be allowed to do it now. If you were coming into the business, you would not be allowed to do it that way.
I think that quite often, actually. I'll be honest, over the course of any given morning, I go, I don't know that this is the way we're supposed to be doing it, but I think we've been doing it this way for long enough. No one's going to correct us. So
CodyTheRoadie.ca. There's still a couple more books. Give him a tap on the shoulder. Oh, look at this. There, you can't see it. There's Gene Simmons, whose second line to you was, "Do you have a lawyer?" I think that's fantastic.
So good. Yeah, CodyTheRoadie.ca, if you'd be so kind as to buy a copy. All the proceeds to the CJ Kids Fund, and that lets us just do some incredible, really important work here in the city.
You are such a good dude. Thank you for doing this.
Brother, thank you for having me. Literally anytime. Thank you.
All right, pal. There you go. JD Lewis, he is our UFC insider. Once we confirm UFC 289, we will let you know.